Good evening, everybody, and welcome to Songwriting Simplified with me, Johnny Lipsham, here at johnnylipshamstudios.co.uk. I hope everybody has had a good few days since we did Sunday Night Live. It's been a busy one here, but a very good one. I'm feeling pretty good today, which is pretty good, actually, considering I have had a pretty rotten 2.5 months with cellulitis. I still have cellulitis. It's not much fun, but I'm feeling like I'm making a wee bit of a recovery finally, which is good. Feel like I've turned the corner a wee bit. So actually feeling pretty good. So we've got a wee gathering of folks here. We've got about 8 or 9 people here today. Rich Cresswell was first in the door, being a whole hour ahead of schedule, which is awesome. Thank you. And we've got Ronald Figura here as well. He had a question which I actually answered. So we'll kind of get to unpacking that a wee bit more in a minute. And we got Billy Morgan here as well, and we've got Kevin from Kevin's Guitar Stories, who just recently relocated. So I hope you're settling in well, my good friend. And who else do we have here? We got John Lake, we got Peter Brooks, who says, "This is the day," which is, I like that. That's kind of like the kind of sentence where you would want like a lot of reverb. For sure. But that's cool. And then Brett Marler is here asking what the topic of the focus for tonight is. And that is chords for their own sake. And I'll unpack what that means a little bit in just a minute. Let's see. And we got Zap here as well, and Don Oliver, and my good friend and sponsor, Louis from Alps Media LLC is here. And we got Billy Morgan, and I've already mentioned him, I think. So there we go. So that's who is here so far. If you're here and you're watching, and you're not subscribed, you won't get access to the chat, unfortunately. I have had to lock the chat and make it subscriber only, so you will notice that subscriber mode only is engaged. So if you want to get involved in tonight's show and you want to ask a question about songwriting, composing, arranging, and music theory, that kind of stuff, which is what we deal with on Songwriting Simplified, if you have a question around that subject, that broad subject area, and you'd like to get involved, then please do hit the subscribe button. Also hit that notification bell as well, and select all notifications so you don't miss either Sunday Night Live or Songwriting Simplified and any other videos that I come out with over the course of this year. And I've got some new stuff coming. I'm going to be doing some videos on Notion for those of you that are into music notation, or you're interested, you're curious as to what can be done. Even if you're not somebody that reads music, but you are working with musicians who do, this is going to be valuable for you, this series on Notion, because one of the things we're going to discuss is the interoperability between Studio One and Notion, what you can do and what you can't do. And what works great and makes it an invaluable tool so that you can create your MIDI parts in Studio One without really having to understand any notation whatsoever. And then you can send that to Notion, and you may have to do a little bit of editing to tidy up the notation to make it a little bit more readable. But once you've done that, then you can print it out. You can give it to your session musicians who do read notation. So all of that stuff is going to be really, really valuable. And with Notion Mobile, the interoperability is even better than it was with Notion 6. So it's going to be valuable whether you are a notation person or not. But I will show you how you can quickly and easily get into notation without really having to understand it too terribly much. And actually, you'll find that as you use Notion, you will find yourself understanding how it works anyway, because it's pretty intuitive. If you put in too many notes in a bar or a measure, depending upon which side of the Atlantic you're on, the notes will appear red, or if the note you've written is too high or too low for the instrument, it will appear red, and that's basically Notion saying, no, you can't do that. So it's pretty good in that way. So breaking news tonight, before we get started into tonight's show, seeing as we're talking about songwriting, a great singer, songwriter, and all-round entertainer, the great Tina Turner has sadly died at the age of 83. She had a stroke not too long ago and has also been battling cancer. And although no cause of death has been officially released, I suspect, without any official information whatsoever, this is just my personal opinion, so don't read too much into this. Or take it as read, or take it as official, or anything like that. It's not. This is just my personal speculation. I rather suspect that that the COD was probably cancer related, I would think. She has been in semi-retirement for quite a long time. She came out of retirement to make a record not too long ago, and has done some collaborations here and there with various artists, but for the most part she has been retired and living in Switzerland. She had Swiss citizenship. She renounced her American citizenship some considerable time ago, so for all intents and purposes she was a Swiss of Swiss nationality. So it's pretty sad because, I mean, she was a bit of a legend because she had an incredibly hard life, and, you know, grew up in the music business under incredibly difficult and painful circumstances, and yet she managed to rise above it all and triumph above it all. You know, she had a lot of setbacks, a lot of knockbacks, and a lot of people that hurt her and abused her and tried to hurt her and abuse her, and yet she managed to not only overcome but outshine those people who tried to take her down, which shows really just what an impressive personality she was. It wasn't just that she was a great vocalist. It wasn't just that she was a great entertainer and performer, which she undoubtedly was, and she wasn't just a really good songwriter, which she was also. But she had a very, very strong personality and tenacity that just would not let go, and was very, very, very determined, even when there were obstacles, even when people were trying to destroy her. She triumphed over them all. She wrote, I think she ghost wrote an autobiography. Maybe about 20 years ago, I think, and there was a biopic made of her life and a musical as well, and all of that just goes to show the strength of character that she was. So she is a great loss to the music industry. She's a great loss as a songwriter, as a performer, and as a musician and vocalist. So she will greatly be missed. So R.I.P. Tina Turner. And with that all said, let's get into the topic for tonight, and then we'll get into some questions. There's only about 10 people here, so this might be a phenomenally, maybe even record-breaking short show, which is not necessarily what I want. But Paul Morgan is here, and I think I missed you at the start there. Sorry about that, Paul. Anyway, let's get into this. So I'm rounding out our little mini-series that we've been doing on harmony and chords, because I think it's time that we kind of moved on a wee bit, and we started talking about other important aspects of songwriting, like melody. How do we write a melody? How do you write a melody that's engaging? How do you write a melody that is going to stick in somebody's brain and, you know, hook them into your song, hook them into what you've got to say as a songwriter? How do you go about doing that? So we're going to do some shows where we're talking about melody writing. We're also going to we're going to do some shows talking about arranging. How do you arrange your song to keep the listener engaged? So things that you can add, things that you can bring into your song, and ways that you can flesh out your song to keep your listener completely compelled and interested from the very beginning to the fade out at the end, or the arranged ending, whichever you prefer to do, which is kind of part of that whole arranging subject. So we're going to do that, and that should take several shows for us to cover. So we're going to cover melody first, melody writing, and then we're going to cover arranging, which will kind of encompass things like counter melodies, obligatos, writing for horn sections, writing for strings, things like that, and do's and don'ts. Although I don't really like do's and don'ts, I think I much prefer to call them this is better, this less better. And some of it is going to come down to personal choice. Some of it's going to come down to what works best and what will not work so well for your music. And that's kind of, I'm going to be broad because I don't want these shows to be pigeonholed into a particular genre. So I'm going to be broad about what works and what doesn't. And you may find that things that I say that are less good may work in some genres pretty well. So no hard and fast rules, just principles, guidelines, and things that will make you sound professional. That's kind of what we're about here, whilst making it simple, because this is Songwriting Simplified. This is all about unpacking what makes songs successful, what makes good songwriting, and how do we access all of those things and apply them to our own songs to make our songwriting better. That's what we're about. All right, so let's get into the topic tonight, which is all about chords for their own sake. Now, what do I mean by chords for their own sake? I mean, let me show you first what I don't mean, because we've covered what I don't mean in this situation. All right, so let me just pull my sustain pedal out a wee bit, and I will turn that down because I always forget. Let's pull the mic over a wee bit so you can hear me. All right, so what I don't mean is this. All right, so that was basically 1, 6, 4, 5, 1. These are chords that progress logically. Okay, they progress logically. They are related chords, related to each other. So this is not what I mean when I say chords for their own sake. And this is something that could work regardless of the style of music that you work in. So if you work in jazz, it will work beautifully. If you work in pop music, it will work pretty well. If you work in folk music, you may find this useful to employ here and there, kind of scatter it around through your songs in different places, like to surprise the listener. And if you work in orchestral music, this is definitely going to be something you can take home and make good use of. So I'm talking about chords that don't necessarily have a clearly defined logical progression. Okay, they are not necessarily related to each other technically. How do we access that kind of music? We access those kind of chords by something called voice leading. What's voice leading? Voice leading is what I did with the first 3 chords of that little progression I played. C to A minor, just by moving the G up to the A. And then F major, by moving the E in the middle up to F. And then moving the top note down 1. And then introducing a fourth note to get this G7 chord. And then keeping the top note and resolving that interval there to there. So that's what I mean by voice leading. Each note of each chord is a stepwise motion. So these two notes are static, the top one moves up one. The bottom and top note are static and the middle one moves up one. And then everything moves a little bit to get to the G7. And then to resolve, the top note stays static and then these bottom notes move up. But we've got the 7th in there as well, which is resolving downwards as well as resolving upwards. Okay, so that's what I mean by voice leading. Now, it works, voice leading works really, really well with chords that are related to each other, as I've just demonstrated here. So when I'm talking about chords for their own sake, I'm talking about chords which don't relate to each other, they don't naturally progress to each other, but you're using them for their own sound's sake. And this is something that was really popular in kind of the Impressionist period of early 20th century music, late 19th century, early 20th century music. People like Ravel, Debussy, and people like that, where, you know, everything was not necessarily about logical progressions, but about making a sound that alluded to something, that gave the impression of something. So if you listen to Debussy's L'après-midi d'un faune, which is all about a gazelle in a field in the middle of the afternoon and Debussy observing its behavior, and you'll notice there that the chords don't move in that natural kind of logical progression of 1, 6, 4, 5, 1. Sometimes they're parallel ninth chords. So what does that mean? Well, that means if I take a C9 chord, so that means taking this down a step, and then taking it down maybe another step, and then maybe taking it down a half step, and then maybe taking it down another half step. And those kind of sounds. So you're taking the sound of a ninth chord and you're just moving it about in parallel fashion. So those chords don't progress naturally. But they sound nice on their own. The chord itself sounds really nice on its own. And so you're just moving it around for its own sake and to create an impression. And so that's what the Impressionist school did. So that's what I mean about chords that don't relate. That's one example. So if I take the idea of a ninth chord, and then let's say I decide I'm going to move these chords by an interval of, let's say, a minor third. So I'm going to go C, E flat, G flat to A. And so that's going to be the movement of chord changes for my first section of my piece. And then the A9 there. Okay, so, and I can use any voicing I like, but I want to try and keep the notes moving in step or close to step as I can. And then to the G flat. And so you end up with something that sounds pleasant, but they don't move in a logical fashion. So that's what I mean by chords for their own sake. You take a chord that you like the sound of and you move it about. And you get this a lot in modern jazz music from, let's say, the late 1950s onwards, when you had what was called the cool school, which is where jazz music became less frenetic. After the bebop period, where everything was played at 500 beats a minute, and the chord changes were incredibly dense and complex, and everybody was using crazy, very, very chromatic laden scales for improvisation, and everything was just basically incredibly complex. Bebop music is very, very complex. And, you know, you have fast melody lines that stop and start, or at almost random, it would appear to, you know, if you're not familiar with the language of bebop. That's what it sounds like. It sounds like this person plays, you know, a little figure. He starts it at random, he finishes at random, then somebody else plays their little figure. Or they play the same thing together in unison. And it sounds really, really good. These two musicians playing in unison, but they apparently start and stop at random, and it's very, very chromatic and can be quite hard to get a handle of. So the cool school was a kind of reaction to that. Everything became stripped back, tempos became a lot more relaxed and a lot more kind of moderate. You could actually move to it a little bit, whereas bebop, you couldn't really dance to it. It was art music, whereas cool music was a little bit more chilled and a little bit more relaxed. It was the jazz equivalent of what Ravel and Debussy had been doing, you know, in the late 19th, early 20th century. So maybe about 60 or 70 years earlier. So they were using these kind of sounds that they inherited from Debussy and Ravel and others like them, and, you know, kind of making jazz music with them. And so the music was just as cerebral and artsy as bebop, but everything was just a little bit more chilled out. So even if you're not working in jazz, if you're working in pop music, you can make use of 9th chords and 13th chords. So let's take a 13th chord here. And you could move this around. So you could go from C, you could go down a minor third to A13, and then you could keep going down. So even in pop music, you can do that. You can actually do that as an alternative to, you know, doing a 3-6-2-5-1, you know, where you're going, which is your kind of more sensible progression. Well, you can kind of go and have the same effect. So you can do that whether you're a jazz person or a folk person or a pop kind of person. Even if you're working in, you know, maybe more industrial metal sounding music or, you know, that kind of thing, you can play with it, you know, with lots of dissonance and chromaticism in those kind of musics, because they're very, you know, that kind of music is pretty aggressive. So yes, power chords are a thing for metal music, but why not move those power chords in a way that the listener doesn't expect? So that's kind of what I wanted to talk about, is don't always just stick to, you know, your anyone can do that. The secret is, how do we interpolate these clever little chords that I'm talking about? Even if you're not using 9th chords, even if you're using just triads, you can still do it. So like that, for example, where I just put in the G flat and the E flat, and the listener's not expecting it. And it can, and of course, with your melody, you've got those extra notes from those chords to provide some extra color that, again, the listener's not expecting, especially if you're working in simple triadic music, you know, like you might do for folk. Okay? So nice and simple. C, A minor, G flat major 7, E flat 9, D minor 7, G7, C. And so you're providing yourself with some new sounds harmonically, and therefore new sounds harmonically, melodically rather. So you've got the chord tones from those chords that you can make some extra interesting melody with. But melody is something that we're going to come to, because for some people, they might be good at strumming chords on a guitar, or playing a few chords on the piano like I just did there. But when it comes to melody writing, they kind of, people just go, I don't know where to start. How do I start a melody? How do I make a melody interesting and not sound like I'm just doing... and randomly walking up and down the keyboard or whatever it might be. Actually, that sounded to me quite interesting, but that's just because I think differently, but to most people. So how do you make melody without making it sound like that? So that's what we're going to do with our melody making series, which we will start next Wednesday. So if melody is your weakness, be here for Songwriting Simplified, where we will start to break melody writing down from something being really abstract into something where everything is bite-sized, and with each little phrase, you've got about 5 or 6 different things that you can do with that phrase to create variations and melody that writes itself with zero effort. And everybody these days in 2023 is all about zero effort. How can I get the most with as little input as possible? You can do that with melody writing and still make it sound interesting. So if that's your bag, if that's your weakness, if that's what you want to learn how to do, then the next several Songwriting Simplified episodes, we're going to focus on melody. And we'll also still keep doing questions as well. So the format is going to be the subject, and then we'll take questions. Now, the questions can be related to the subject, but they don't have to. I can see there are a few questions in here already. So we're going to split straight out and into question time. And some of them are actually related to the subject, which is great. That's what I like to hear. All right, so let's see what we got. Secret Squirrel is here, which is awesome. And he says, not creating chords organically or in complement of the overall arrangement, but attempting to be fancy or add things in attempt to add ingredients without thought to purpose. I'm not talking about just playing random chords. Random chords is actually one thing you can do. Random chance music is a genre all of its own. There is such a thing as completely, fully improvised music, where, you play music that, where you deliberately avoid any kind of musical relationships between things that you do when you improvise. So, notes that you play, the next note cannot be derived from any relationship to that note or to the next note. So that's actually really hard to do, improvising, because you play a note and you go, okay, I'm playing that A. That means I cannot play a C sharp because that's related. I cannot play an F sharp. I cannot play a D because that's also related. I cannot play an E because that's related. I cannot play an F sharp because that's related. I cannot play a G sharp because that's related. So there are lots of relationships, but there are also lots of non-relationships. So I could play an E flat because the interval there is an augmented fourth or diminished fifth, depending upon your outlook on life. So I could do that. I could also do a G above that. So those are not related. So the same it is with chords. They don't have to be related. But that's not to say there's no thought and there's no purpose. Because any sound that you make that is musical is valid in and of its own right. So if you just pick up a saxophone and play one single note for about 2 seconds and then put the saxophone down in its stand and walk off the stage, that is a valid musical statement. And I know you're going to go, that's weird. It is. It's a valid musical statement. It is as much a valid musical statement as walking into a public building and saying one word really loudly that gets everybody's attention and then walking out of the building. You have made a statement. They're going to look at you a little bit weird because you've just said a word without any context, but you've still made a valid statement. What makes music work is the combination of statement, intent, and context. So that's what you need. Those are the 3 key things that make music work best. I'm not expecting everybody to be into totally random chance music, improvisational music that has no formal structure to it. Some people are into that, some people aren't. I suspect that I might be a minority of one here because I've played group improvisation music where me and my band have walked out onto the stage with no rehearsal, no preconceived ideas of what anybody is going to play for the entire show. We just walk out onto the stage, we sit down, and we pick up our instruments and we play. Somebody will play some notes. Somebody will play some other notes in response to that. And eventually you have a musical conversation going between the people on the bandstand. And that conversation is entertaining to the listening audience. And they're also kind of a little bit kind of excited and on edge as well because they don't know what to expect. So that kind of music is really fun to play. It's really fun to do. So I hope that I've kind of answered that for you a wee bit. So Brett says, so turn left chords, the chord that isn't related to the others. I mean, I'm not really sure what you mean by right and left turn chords. I'm not sure what that means. But chords can be related. Like, those can all be completely related. And of course, you can substitute any of those and come out with this. And they do the same job. All of those chords do exactly the same job as the 1, 6, 2, 5, 1. I'm doing 1, flat 3, 2, flat 2, 1. And they do the same job. Okay? But the E flat chord is not technically a relative to the key of C major because there's no E flat in the key of C, right? So technically in the key of C, E flat does not belong, and neither does D flat. So those two are foreign to the key of C major. But as you can see, they still fit, and you get the tension that they provide because they don't belong in the key of C major, but you also get the resolution because they resolve back down to the C. There's your resolution, okay? And that's what makes music work best. Sorry, my chair is really squeaky at the moment. And so they don't have to be related. Chords don't have to be related. It's great when they are, and those work. But you can also make use of non-related chords to have a really useful effect. So you could go C, A minor, A flat major 7, D7, and C major, and still have the same effect as you had before. you've just added some extra color from some chords that don't belong. So you can go full out, kind of just literally chords that aren't related to each other, but you like the sound of. I've done that a fair amount recently, and I'm going to show you an example of that in Notion. So I'm going to share my screen, and I will show you what I've got. This is a tune that I started writing last week, actually, and I just kind of started playing with some chords. And it sounded kind of a little bit mysterious, which is why I called it Bending Spoons. Because to me, mystery and kind of magic go together. So bending spoons, there are magicians that bend spoons. People like Uri Geller, he made an absolute fortune out of bending spoons. Whether he actually really bent them or not is kind of not really the point. But he certainly made it look like he really bent the spoon without doing very much. Sometimes it was, he said it was all in the power of his mind. Sometimes he was just melting with friction, melting the spoon and making it bend that way. Either way, what I've done with this song is completely throw out the rules of logical chord progressions and come up with something that sounds logical when it isn't. So I'll play this first little 8-bar section for you. And there's no key signature because there's no key. It just starts with a chord I like the sound of. And then it goes to another chord I like the sound of. This D flat major 7 with the sharp 11. And then we go to C minor, F13, and then we drop down a semitone, E minor, A flat 7. Now as you can hear, these chords sound logical because there's lots of stepwise motion. So if I emphasize the top note of each chord, you'll see what I mean. And they kind of sound a little bit mysterious. So my guiding part of this little set of chord changes was actually that top note of each chord. I thought I could make a little melody out of those notes. And from the melody, I basically just played chords that I liked the sound of. So we've got a B flat major with a D in the bass. Then we're going down to D flat major. These chords are not related to each other, folks. The only real relationship is here. C minor to F13. But then we're going down again. And then we're going to an interval of a third. Then we're going to D flat minor. And then to this chord. I love the sound of this chord. It's just a G triad with an E flat bass. So there's an example of chords that that are not related to each other in the slightest, and yet they work together, and they work together in a really pleasing way. And it's mostly because everything moves. Like these three notes here move by an easy interval. And that's why they work. So this is why non-related chords can actually progress well together. So the key thing to make this work is don't just pick a chord and another chord at random and expect them to work, because they won't. So if I play this A triad and then, pick something out at random, like, I don't know, an E flat, for example. Now, maybe for something really dramatic, that would be very effective. Like if you're writing a brass fanfare and you want to announce the arrival of somebody who has a lot of power, a lot of authority, then that might do the job, because you're saying they've got power, they've got authority, but they are also a little bit weird. And that interval is a little bit weird. That's the flatted fifth again. And they're also leaping from root position to root position, which is I never advocate, but sometimes it can work like there. So certain circumstances, even that will work. But for the most part, you're not. If you're writing a little, love song, you're not going to go... You're not going to do that in a nice little love ballad, are you? Unless you're saying something particularly stark in your lyrics. So I hope that answers that. That was a long answer. Let's see. So Brett kind of follows up a wee bit. He says, so like taking a diminished seventh chord and walking it down chromatically, you can certainly do that. Would you say that these chords are used as passing tone chords or transitional phases to another section? You can use those like that. Yes, you can use the diminished chord as a passing chord. For example, oh dear God, my chair sounds horrible. Take this for example. Let's say I want to go from B flat major, and then I want to go to D minor. And then I want to go to G minor, C minor, F, and B flat. Now, all of those are logical and related to each other. Now, I'm going to introduce some interesting chords here. So, let's say I want to get to chord 3, but I want to take my time over it. So I'm going to take some steps along the way. I'm going to go for a little walk. So let's go B flat major. And let's go B half diminished. That leads nicely into C minor. Let's go another diminished chord, which also leads nicely to the chord 3. And there we are, chord 3, D minor. All right, so let's do that again. So I wanted to fill the gaps, so I used non-related chords. This B half diminished does not belong in the key of B flat. C minor does though, and D minor does, so let's do a passing diminished chord. And that works. So doing a diminished chord into a minor chord works. And you could keep that going if you really, really wanted to. And you could keep walking up chromatically doing that if you really wanted to. But I hope that kind of helps point you in that direction. Let's see, what else do we have? Ronald Figueres says, sorry about that, I forgot songwriting tonight. No problem. And Rich Cresswell says the word that I've been waiting for, which is bogeys. Yes, exactly. One of my favorite things to do. Walk into a public building and yell bogeys at the top of my lungs and walk out again. Makes a statement. So Secret Squirrel says, no, it makes a lot of sense. Yes, is an exclamatory statement. Doesn't need a sentence, paragraph, or stanza. It makes sense. I can dig. Yes, there you go. Perfect. So you're really into Bill Bruford's Earthworks. Random left truns are a metaphor for the unexpected move. Yes, I do like Bill Bruford's Earthworks, actually. I went to see them when I was in my early teens, and they were fantastic, and I got to spend time with them after the show as well. We went to the pub and had drinks. And it was great. They were very, very cool. Very, very nice people. And really interesting music. The Anonymous Housewife is here. Awesome. Good to see you. Thank you for coming. Glad you're here. I hope you are enjoying the show. Let's see. I call those without an actual key center as being in the skeleton key. Yeah, maybe. But as for this song, I don't know what the skeleton key is for this song. I mean, it starts on a B-flat major chord, but as I go down, it definitely does not end in B-flat major. So I guess the fact that B-flat comes up a wee bit here and a wee bit here, maybe it is loosely in the key of B-flat. I don't know. Jury's out a little bit on that. Excuse my snorting. Neil is here. Hello, Neil. Good to see you. Glad you're here. Let's go back over to here so you're not having to look at Notion for the whole time. The most genius 8-chord sequence I've ever encountered in semi-modern pop music. Rise, Herb Alpert. I have heard that, but a long time ago, so I don't necessarily think I'm particularly familiar with it, but I have heard of it. And yeah, there are some very fun chord changes in that song. Let's see. The song Downtown is a good example by Yellow Jackets. Yes, that is another good example. Yep. Risk Crashwell says, unless you're Tim Minchin. I love the music of Tim Minchin. That guy is not only a terrific piano player, but he writes hilarious songs. One of my favorites is the song where he's in F, but he can only sing in F sharp, and that's hard to do, to sing in F sharp when your hands are playing in F on the piano, and yet you're singing in F sharp, and it's very, very entertaining. It's very amusing, and it's difficult to do, but he nails it. He's pitch perfect in tune the whole way. It's very cool. So if you've never heard of who I'm talking about, I think he's Australian or he's from New Zealand. I can't remember which. He is from one or t'other Southern Hemisphere country. I can't remember which, unfortunately. But he is very, very funny. He is a comedian. He is a songwriter. He's a exceptionally good piano player. Really, really good. He's classically trained, but he plays jazz, he plays blues, he plays stride piano. I've heard him do the Maple Leaf Rag very, very high tempo. And I've heard him play some Fats Waller songs as well, and with again really, really breathtaking piano dexterity, and yet he's singing, and it's very, very entertaining. So let's see, anybody got any other comments or questions? Because we've got 8 minutes left. Let me grab a wee drink whilst I wait for you. Yeah, Tim Minchin is hilarious. He is. He's very, very, very funny and an absolutely outstanding piano player as well. I'd love to be able to do half the things he can do. That's for sure. Bops says Yellow Jackets do a lot of those leading notes to get around the tune as well. Yeah, and you know where they learned that from? They learned that from Joe Zawinul, the master of that kind of thing. The composer and co-band leader of Weather Report. So, for example, if you listen to tunes like Havona, for example, which I think is on the Heavy Weather record, for Weather Report, not only is Jaco Pastorius' bass playing and drumming, because he's playing drums on that as well, absolutely awesome, but the chord changes are a very fine example of these chords that kind of don't really relate, but they are led by the melody. It's the melody on Wayne Shorter's soprano saxophone that is then kind of elevated by the chord changes. The chord changes are derived from the melody. I know sometimes, like me, I tend to come up with chord changes first, and then the melody kind of pops out from the chord changes. Well, sometimes it's pretty clear that tunes like Havona are the opposite. It's the melody that's come first, and then the chord changes have been derived out of the melody. So the melody is kind of the top note of the chords in many of those cases. Brett says the skeleton key opens all doors. It absolutely does. You can access any key from any other key just by using a little bit of harmonic trickery. Bobby Booth says, I got 1,000 questions, but in this group it would sound like I will keep my question to myself. Bobby, I think I said this on last week's show. You know, I know you're here to support me primarily on Wednesdays, and I value that so much, and I appreciate it more than you know. And you're also here because you like to learn new stuff as well, which is awesome. And the cool thing for you here is that all of these things you're learning about harmony, about melody, about songwriting and arranging and all of that, is going to help you as a mix engineer, because I know mixing is your bag. That's what you do the most. That's your strength. But the more you learn about melody and the more you learn about harmony, the more you can start thinking about elements of the mix that you can automate, that you can bring to the fore here, you can set back in the mix here. You know, like a little rising melody line or a rising sequence where you've got, you know, or something like that. You can emphasize that with automation. Like maybe you go, hey, actually what I need to do with this is I need to do a frequency sweep or something like that, so that this melody starts off subtle and then becomes more and more prominent and more prominent the higher up it goes. So there's little things that you can learn from that, because you've learned about them here, you've learned about them from a musical point of view, and you can go, great, this is something I can emphasize in the mix, and I can make this element come through. And it's a little bit of extra ear candy. It's ear candy provided by the composer, and you're just able just to sprinkle a little bit of fairy dust all over it with some automation and some other mixing techniques that will make it really come alive. So this is why, to me, I think it's really important that mix engineers, mastering engineers learn as much as they can about how music works and the tools that are used to make music work, so that they know what to emphasize and when. You know, sometimes some mix engineers, they just go on an instinct and they go, this needs emphasized because it's cool. So they'll just emphasize it because it's cool, and they won't really think about why they're emphasizing it. They'll just go, oh, it's just cool, I like it, so I'm going to give that a little 2 dB boost, and then I'm going to pull it back again because it's a cool little lick on trumpet or a guitar or something, and I want to make sure that that doesn't get missed by the listener. The listener goes, "Oh, hey, that's cool." Yeah, but that's an obligato. Obligatos are important. Counter melodies are important because they juxtapose the main melody. They provide counterpoint. Sometimes literally counterpoint. Sometimes not literally. It's just a response to the main melody. So those things can be emphasized. You can use a delay. Maybe you can use a reverb. You can pan it. You can do panning automation to make it move around the spectrum if you want. There's all sorts of things you can do to emphasize these little things that we're talking about. So if you know what they are and how they work, then you've got even more power and even more authority as a mix engineer to be able to sprinkle fairy dust all over those kind of concepts. Let's see. Dave Garibaldi was not playing that. I'm not sure what you're referring to there, Dave. He was the drummer with Tower of Power for a very long time, and he came up with some outstanding drum parts for their songs. Brett says he asks a question is a fool, but for a moment. He who has a question and does not ask it shall be a fool for a lifetime. Yeah, I've heard that. I've heard that before. All right, and with that, we will wrap tonight's show. That's an interesting bit of wisdom to finish with. And Dave at Pops NY says, question everything, being silent yields no knowledge. Exactly. If you've got knowledge, if you even got a question related to something that maybe you go, I'm not really sure how that works. I'm not really sure I understood that. Well, if you didn't understand it, there may well be other people also here or watching on the replay. Thank you. Actually, speaking directly to those of you who are watching on the replay, thank you. Thank you very much. I really appreciate you very much. So if you are watching on the replay, please hit the like button if you find this stuff useful. If you've come across this video and you're not a subscriber, hit the subscribe button. If you like this stuff and you want to see more, if you want to be involved in Wednesday, it's Wednesday 6 p.m. Central Time in the United States. Although I'm here in Scotland, so for me it's midnight. And if you're in Europe, Central Europe, it's going to be 1 a.m. But yeah, work out what your time zone is. And then, of course, I have Sunday Night Live on Sundays as well, which is much more about Studio One in particular. Wow, that S was loud. Which is rare for me because I have a lisp. So Sunday nights is all about Studio One and Studio One related questions and Studio One related stuff. So if you are into that, please come and join me on Sunday. I would really appreciate it. We tend to have an audience around about 25 or so. I would love it if we could push beyond our record, which is 36. So if we could push beyond 36 and start to push that regularly, this would be really great. I would love to be able to get 50 people regularly attending on Wednesdays and Sundays, because that would encourage me to keep this going. I've been doing this now for 5 years. I've been doing Songwriting Simplified with Johnny up until last year when I took over doing it myself full time. So yeah, I would love to get the audiences up to 50 for Wednesday and 50 for Sunday. So please, guys who are regulars, girls who are regulars, ladies, gentlemen, lords, ladies, please do hit like, subscribe, share with your friends who you think will benefit from this, and invite them along, get them into this, and we can build this community and this audience even better. Thank you very much, guys. I will see you all on Sunday for Sunday Night Live. And if you had a question from tonight but you didn't ask it, or you weren't sure how to phrase it, you want a wee bit more time, go to the website address down there, johnnylipsonstudios.co.uk, hit the contact button. Wait, not the microphone. Hit the contact us menu item at the top there. You'll automatically be scrolled down to the bottom where you'll find the contact form. Fill that out, ask your question, and we'll start next week's show with that question. All right, I'll see you all then, folks. Thanks very much for coming. See you then. Good night, everybody.